It's Weighing In, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast.
How's it going, everyone? Ryan Patty from NJ.com here with my three fellow New Jersey high school wrestling experts in Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and Jacob Ferriet. And this is the final episode of Weighing In, episode number 10 of your go-to New Jersey high school wrestling podcast. We're going to break down all 14 state champions on this episode, how the podium shook out at each weight, and we'll also be picking a burning topic ahead of next season, a season that might not stack up to this one, but it'd also be pretty fun. This season was epic. It was absolutely epic. We've talked about the senior class. We've talked about what's made it a special season, and I can't wait to dive into it one last time here. But I think before we take a look at each champion and the podiums at each weight, we can't ignore the big news of the weekend, and that's Anthony Knox's fourth state championship. He beat Nate Braun by convincing major decision to become just the fifth New Jersey wrestler to win 4 state titles. He's certainly the best that I've ever seen in my time covering the sport. We've talked about, the off the mat stuff a bunch, obviously, the past couple weeks. But the first time we talked about it, we talked a lot about Knox's legacy and how good of a wrestler he is. Joe and Bill, I'll let you guys discuss this because, I'm only 28. I haven't been following the sport for as long as you guys have. And Jake is even younger than me. I didn't see the other 4-timers, but you guys have seen all 5. Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot here first. Now that the book is closed here on Anthony Knox's high school career, is he the best wrestler in state history?
In my mind, he is. And Bill has talked about it, just the way he scores points, literally at will. And, his technique is flawless. He's much tougher than he looks. And to be able to do the things he does as consistently as he does, to me, makes him the best. Now, I agree with Bill that Damian Hahn is right there for the same reasons that he was able to score enormous amounts of points. And I just can't get over how dominant Anthony Knox is. And, wherever he's gone, whatever tournament he's been in, whatever person has been standing across the circle from him, he is absolutely manhandled. I mean, one loss in a career, and I'm sure he would love to have that one back. I think, for Anthony, as happy as he is to be only the 5th 4-timer, I think he would love to have the opportunity again to wrestle for that unbeaten 4-year career. And again, the off the mat stuff aside, I agree with those folks who have expressed the sentiment that he's not done here, that, this is not just a good high school wrestler who's going to, vanish in obscurity. This kid is going to do some things at the next level at Cornell. And again, I've seen them all. I've seen all those bouts, and, they were all different wrestlers, and they all wrestled in different eras of New Jersey wrestling. Mike Gray won it when riding was in vogue, and scoring massive amounts of points was not necessarily the way to go. But, as you go through the rest of them, you see how it's evolved to, Andrew Camplatano and then Anthony Eschenault, and, offense has become the big premium in the sport. And again, he's like a pinball machine when it comes to scoring. So, in my opinion, he's the best I've ever seen, Ryan.
Bill, interject here. What do we think?
Yeah, I mean, he's right up there. I mean, I've always said Damian Hahn for me was the best, and despite the fact he didn't win 4, he lost as a freshman 2-1 in the state final. And all, he was an upper weight, so was a little more challenging for him to win all 4. But they were very much the same wrestlers, and watching Knox at States this year, again, the way they both scored points, and I also thought but before this, I remember Damian's senior year, him just kind of being a celebrity there, and walking around and signing autographs, and even with all the extracurriculars that were going on with Knox this year, he was doing very much the same, taking selfies with kids. Soriano was a different wrestler, and did not score points like those other two, but defended as well as anybody. He gave up one takedown in his whole career, and he also probably as much as Knox, won the Beast of the East 3 times and won the Escape the Rock and wrestled a lot of great teams. I mean, Soriano, I think, took that to another level. He was a 4-time Beast champ. They went out to California and wrestled in the Doc Buchanan, and they were wrestling, Bethlehem Catholic, and they were in Who's Number One. They wrestled Blair. I mean, it was, and Soriano didn't win. So I think his level of competition was higher than everybody else's. His ability to defend was higher than everybody else's. Knox and Hahn scored at a level that I've never seen. So I guess it's maybe personal preference. I have trouble picking between the 3 of them, but those are the top 3 in my mind. Obviously, what happened with him being DQ'd and then coming back, I think down the road, obviously I talked a week or 2 ago about, there always being a what if, because he didn't win 4, now that he did. I think some of that stuff will go away in time. I don't think we'll ever forget it, what happened. But, he will be a 4-timer, and that will be part of his legacy now, that we weren't so sure about a few weeks ago. But as far as, what happened on the mat, he's right up there. He's definitely in my top 3. And if you want to say he's the best, I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah, like I said a couple episodes ago, he's at the very least on my Mount Rushmore, and there were four times before this year. Now there's 5, and the 5th is Anthony Knox. So let's dive into some of these weight class recaps here. I think we should probably start with 113 because that's what they did for the actual finals down in AC. You had Cam Sontz win his 2nd title and complete an unbeaten season. He beat Charlie Esposito for the 2nd time by this decision this year. This one was a little closer than what happened in non-public A in the finals there. Like I said, it's his 2nd title. He's kind of proving that, he's one of the best pound-for-pound kids in the state, if he hasn't already done so. I actually picked against Esposito to get there. I thought Anthony Mason would avenge that loss from Escape the Rock, but he didn't. It was a 2-1 decision again. Charlie Esposito really had a good end of the year, and so did Carmine Sipper. And, I haven't had the chance to talk to Cam Sontz since the Morris County tournament his freshman year, but he's an intelligent kid, and he's one who's now building a legacy. Jake, you spoke with him, and I'm curious to hear what he had to share, with the thoughts of his season and what you thought kind of just of this weight class as a whole.
Yeah, so this weight class I thought was definitely one of the more interesting ones, among the lower weights. I think we all picked Sontz to win. So in that sense, maybe we thought it was kind of a foregone conclusion. But like you said, Carmine Sipper from Caldwell, who was a blood rounder last year, took 3rd. This year, Mike Daly from Cranford, who was the 12 seed, made the semifinals and got on the podium. He avenged an earlier loss to Johnson. Zach Belverio handed Belverio his first loss of the season. Mason, to your point, obviously I picked him to make the final as well. So, yeah, I think there were a lot of interesting results. And then in the final, Sontz only won 4-2. But the thing that he told me afterward is he's like, listen, I've been in a state final before. I know what it takes. So I'm not going to go out and take unnecessary shots and, run that risk and potentially get caught. He said, listen, he's wrestled McGinty. He knows what to expect. He knows kind of his style. And so, that plays to his advantage because he knows, hey, it might only take one takedown. And the thing that Sontz told me is he's like, I know I can take down anyone in the country. And he kind of proved it here. So, I thought that was interesting. And I mean, you'll talk about Jayden James later, but he's one of 2 Del Barton wrestlers to finish undefeated this year. And the thing Coach Brian Stoll told me afterward is, listen, between the national tournament schedule that they wrestle and also the national dual meet schedule that they wrestle, to wear a green wave singlet and go undefeated, seeing the caliber of guys that they see is super impressive. And, I think that definitely speaks to the fact that, listen, when these guys come into the state tournament, they're well tested. They've wrestled in big environments before, they've wrestled some of the top guys before. So there's nothing foreign to them about this. There's nothing new that they haven't seen. And I think that lets them take this tournament for what it is, which is just another wrestling tournament. And obviously, kind of as cliche as that sounds, we've all interviewed a bunch of guys who have been in Boardwalk Hall for the first time, and they talk about the atmosphere. They talk about how the moment gets to them, or if they've never wrestled in the state final, the nerves set in. So, I think that's a big part of this too. And the other thing too is, listen, and obviously, Ryan, you've been around, Del Barton a few years longer than I have, but it doesn't matter if you're a freshman, if you're a sophomore, there are expectations on you at Del Barton. Plenty of young wrestlers for the Green Wave have come in and made an impact right away. And so there's a legacy there of, hey, just because you're a freshman doesn't mean, or a sophomore, doesn't mean you won't be expected to produce. And, the thing that Sontz said about that is, there are expectations kind of everywhere, whether it's from fans, teammates, coaches. And so, he said the biggest thing for him is just tuning all of them out, sort of staying within himself and doing his thing. And listen, he's got it down to a science. Clearly it's worked for him. And, I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of just how much further he can go as his career progresses. And, again, I think the fact that, we could see Esposito again, obviously next year, Mason's going to be back. A lot of these kids are going to be back in the mix next year. So a lot of them are going to be playing catch up to Sontz. And I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of all the levels that these guys wind up jumping.
Yeah, you mentioned expectations at Del Barton, and Coach Stoll's top assistant, Guy Russo, he says it best. No matter if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, classes don't matter. Like, you're all the same there. If you come in as a freshman, you're expected to wrestle like a senior, and it's kind of special that kids at Del Barton are able to do that. At 120, Paul Kenny got Christian Brothers back on the board in AC with a 1-0 decision win over John McGinty. These two have gone back and forth. Well, not back and forth. Kenny's actually won every match against McGinty, but they've gone at it since their youth days. And, Paul Kenny, he just wins. He's proven that he can score. He's proven that he can win a match that goes back and forth. And on Saturday, he did it, with how he usually does it. And that's with defense. Joe, what does this win mean for Kenny, who obviously fell short last year against Tyler Hagenson in the semifinals? And what does it mean for CBA? And I couldn't believe, how little amount of state titles that CBA's won individually, with how storied that program is, with how many good wrestlers have come out of there. And what'd you make of this weight class as a whole? Because there's a few kids who made the podium that caught my attention.
Well, I think last year we were all surprised when, Kenny, who's a former junior world champion, lost to Tyler Hagenson in Mount Olive 4-3 in the semifinals in Atlantic City. And I know one of the concerns I had was his ability to score against top shelf competition. So what does he do last weekend? He goes out and wins the state title with a "I don't need no stinking takedowns" victory. I know we told Ryan how dangerous and unpredictable Jonathan McGinty is, and how he didn't want to end up under him because he would, McGinty is a scrambler. He likes to roll around and take his chances, and he'll come out on top, much of the time. But can you guys even fathom the confidence and the chutzpah it takes to win a state championship 1-0? I mean, Jake and Ryan may not have been part of it, but go back to Dean Peterson, the one year he won his state title 1-0 as well. And I remember Dean Peterson saying to everybody that, well, I wanted to show you that I could ride somebody out, and wow, and that's the kind of class I think that Kenny is in. He had 3 tech falls on his way to the final, so we know he can score, but he is more defensive minded. He's more of a counter guy. And McGinty didn't play his game. McGinty wasn't going to go in and get nervous and squeamish and start taking bad shots and give away points. And I'll just say this about Paul Kenny. He went the distance with Knox in a dual meet. And I think that shows his mindset and his skill level. It was an unusual bracket. I think there were some crazy things that happened, as you mentioned, Ryan. But by the same token, as you said, he's just steady Eddie. He doesn't deviate from what he does or how he does it. I think one of the interesting things in the off season is how big he gets. If he stays in the 126, 132 range, that's one thing. But, if he has a growth spurt and then pops into 38 or 44, I'll be interesting to see how he adapts his style then. Like I said, this is a kid who has proven he can win any variety ways, including 1-0. And while it was not the most exciting final at Boardwalk Hall, I mean, it certainly was one of the most courageous, in my opinion.
Yeah, he went in there with a game plan, and it was very, very well executed. 126, Bill, we'll go to you here. Where this weight class had more than just the history from Knox. You spoke with Nate Braun before the final. I spoke with him after the Region 1 tournament, and he's the type of kid who next year he's going to come back with tunnel vision. He's a quiet kid, but a very, very focused kid. He's now a 3-time state medalist, and it kind of seems like he's found what he needs to do to stay healthy, and that's, stay in the weight class where he feels he belongs in. And Anthony DeAndrea, Colton Haggerty got to the podium. I mean, Sal Borrometti lost his first-round matchup and wrestled all the way back to the podium. Joaquin Decay was a name that surprised us here. What else did you see, Bill, from 126?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, Braun, not only a 3-time medalist, but a 2-time finalist, top 4, I believe, all 3 years. And as you mentioned, I mean, he went up to 132 this year, and understandably, because if your goal is to win a state title, you don't really want to be in the same weight class as Anthony Knox. But credit to him, he came down. He thought that he was kind of suffering some injuries at 132 because he was kind of out of his weight class, and decided he was going to go his weight. And just wanted to see how he fared against Knox. And I thought, coming into the tournament, Knox had pretty much teched and pinned everybody this year, outside of the finals of the Beast of the East and then the Kenny match. I think might have been the only two. And, the last 3 matches, he got pushed to 6 minutes. There were 3 major decisions. Devin Ryan took him down in the quarterfinal. Colton Haggerty kind of closed the gap a little bit from their match at the Beast of the East. And then Braun ended up being a major decision too. And like you said, a lot of those guys are back. Braun and DeAndre and Haggerty, the next 3 guys in there are all juniors. So, I mean, I think a lot of them, took steps this year. Got a little higher on the podium. DeAndre especially, I think took a big jump to finish 3rd. And, I think a lot of those guys are going to be in the mix next year, and we'll see. Obviously, who else ends up in those weight classes, whether a Sontz or a Kenny end up in the same class as Braun or Haggerty, just, based on how kids grow. But I thought there was a lot of good battles and a lot of underclassmen in that weight class beyond Knox that performed really well. And obviously, like you said, the history there being made that even though Knox got pushed, ended up becoming the 4-timer.
We'll stay with you here at 132, where Sammy Spaulding got through a gauntlet of a path to win his first state title. And we know how dark and dreary that loading dock can be in the corner of the arena. And I still have that image from last year where I was down there where Sammy was slamming his head into the garage door after his loss to C. Chibler. He certainly made up for that moment, and he did it by beating Brian Little, Jackson Slotnick once again, Vinny Paino in rideouts, and then Ryan DeGeorge in an epic final. Bill, talk about this run and how incredible this weight class turned out to be, really for the whole season.
Yeah, we talked about it and how deep it was, and how there were 6 or 7 guys that could win it, and I think it kind of played out that way. It's kind of funny, like on last week's podcast, because of some time constraints, we didn't go and all make our picks. We did that online. And I did pick Spaulding, but what I was going to say last week was that this very much reminded me of the 132-pound weight class where Clearview's Zach Firestone won it, where he was, I thought, the best guy in the bracket, and ended up with just every tough kid on his side of the bracket and having to go through everybody, which he did. And ironically, I bumped into Zach Firestone this weekend, and he reminded me about how I had faith in him despite his draw. And I told him that Sammy Spaulding was basically following his same path, and that ended up to be the case. But what a great run for Spaulding, who lost in the second round as the number 1 seed last year, came back and got 4th. Beat a bunch of good kids during the year. Bobby Duffy, Dalton Weber, who he ended up not having to see the second time around. Like you said, Little, he beat Jackson Slotnick twice. Slotnick he beat in overtime in the region final, came back and won more decisively. the match against Vinny Paino in the semifinal, he rides him out in the tiebreaker. And then to go down 6-0 against Ryan DeGeorge, who's a defending state champ, even though obviously DeGeorge had his struggles this year, kind of put it together in AC. And just the fight back, he got a late reversal at the end of the first period, rode him out the whole second period, which he needed to do. Then gets an escape, a takedown with a minute to go, and rides him out the other, the whole third period, and just seemed to have a little more in the tank at the end and takes him down pretty quickly in overtime. But it was just a phenomenal run. His coach Bill Heverly said it was the worst draw he's ever seen out of a number one seed. But as he talked about Sammy, and he's got grit and tenacity and want to, and he was just not going to be denied that weekend. It was just an incredible weight class. We saw some other guy, Patrick O'Keefe was another one, as a 4-time state placer, former state finalist, was in that weight class. Paino beat in overtime. There were some great matches throughout that whole field, and Spaulding just decided he wasn't going to lose and didn't. He's got another year left, come back and try to put himself on the list of Camden Catholic 2-timers, with Lucas Ravano and Taylor Walsh and Martin Cosgrove. But just a tremendous performance by him, winning one of what I thought was one of the deepest weight classes in the whole tournament.
At 138, Caden Ricciardi won his second title with another pin of Carson Walsh from Pope John. Ricciardi pinned Walsh at the Beast of the East, and he had an even faster pin on Saturday in 57 seconds. And that 57-second pin tied Lenny Richardson from St. Peter's for the fastest pin in program history in the state final. Ricciardi is now the only 2-time state champion in St. Peter's history, and his head coach in Anthony Verdi thinks that he is the best in program history. And Ricciardi, didn't want to agree with that on the spot. He's a very humble kid. I'm certainly going to agree with his head coach. And he's a 2-time champ. He's a beast champ. He's an Escape the Rock champ. He did that when he was a freshman. 4-time state medalist, 3-time state finalist. When he was a sophomore, he lost to Luke Stanich in a very controversial final there. People still talk about that. He beat Jayden James last year. So to me, he is the best wrestler in St. Peter's history. And Walsh is a very accomplished wrestler too. He's a 4-time medalist. He's made 2 trips to the finals. Adrian DeJesus at this weight wrestled through injury one last time, and he took 5th place. I spoke with him at length after the 5th place match, and his story is very inspirational. He had 2 fractured vertebrae that he worked through all year, and Chase Hansen pinned DeJesus in the consolation semis. The second time DeJesus got pinned this year. It was just mind-blowing to see it. But then Hansen lost to Chase Connaught in the 3rd place match. This was just an epic weight. Gideon Gonzalez, Armani McCann, 2 kids in our individual rankings for most of the year. They had a great tournament. They made the podium, and Scotty Sari did so as well to end his high school career there for Southern. So, what a fun weight class that was. It wasn't quite 132, but it was darn near close to it. Then at 144, you had probably the biggest stunner of the entire tournament, and that came in the semifinals with Blaze Mele defeating Sonny Amato. Mele took that win into the finals and then beat Donnie Almeida by decision. And then, the rest of this weight, we talked about it all year. It went from, a dozen deep to 15 deep, I would say. And, 6 more really good wrestlers made the podium this year. Just a really good year for 144. Jake, what'd you think about this weight class and what happened here in AC?
Yeah, so I guess first things first is, listen, anytime you knock the defending state champ, it's going to put people on notice and it's going to impress people. But, Ryan, you and I were there last year. Blaze Mele in overtime at the San Cali last year beat a nationally ranked kid from Blair and Billy DeCraker. And that was in sudden victory. He scored early. And, I remember talking to Blaze after that bout and just what it did for his confidence. And, for a kid from Princeton to score a win like that, of all the wrestlers and the teams we talk about, I would say the CBC is probably the one area we talk about the least. And that's not to say there aren't good wrestlers. It's just, we've become so myopic and so focused on the powerhouses that we forget sometimes there are great kids. And I think Blaze Mele reaffirmed that. So, he's been on our radar, I think, since last year for you and I, Ryan. And, if you had told me, hey, he's going to score a signature win, another signature win. I don't think we would have been surprised. Again, this was a kid who was a state medalist last year, so he's clearly always been right on the cusp. But I mean, the thing that really stood out to me is kind of how, Mele took to heart the things that Amato had said beforehand. And, he told Joe, that, Amato talked about how nobody can get close to him and things like that. And, Mele's like, what? I didn't just get close to him. I beat him. And, that I think with all the pomp and circumstance that's going on in the tournament and how much sensory overload it can be, it seemed like that result sort of flew under the radar a little bit and maybe didn't elicit the reaction that it deserved, because it was, I think, the biggest win of the tournament, the most emphatic win of the tournament. And, I think the fact that he beat him 3-2, the fact that, he had a great game plan, he got the first takedown and then defended well. He knew what he was going to do. He knew what he needed to do, and it worked. And credit to Jess Monzo, the Princeton coach. Credit to Mele for having that game plan, sticking to it in that stage. And then, he gets to the final against Donnie Almeida, who's a 4-time medalist for Pope John, came over from St. Joe's, and he dominated him. I mean, he beat him 7-1 in the final. So, this is not like a kid who, went out and won every match by, a point or two. He had the results to show for it. And, he beat another state medalist in Loudon Henry from St. Peter's Prep. He teched him 16-0 in 5 minutes. Like, that's an impressive result in and of itself. So, he beat Reed Clausey from West Essex, who I know, Ryan, you were high on for a long time. He majored him 16-2. So, I think, and Blaze is going to Princeton, so he's obviously clearly a smart kid. He's one of a bunch of Princeton commits in the field. Phillipsburg's Gavin Hawk is going, Hanover Park's Vincenzo Laval. And so, I think this result shows that, hey, don't overlook anybody in this tournament, and you never know. And just because you're a defending state champ doesn't really mean anything. This is a tournament where anybody can be beat on any given day. And I think Blaze, especially exemplified that. But, you mentioned the depth of this weight, Ryan. I mean, you look at a kid like C. Chibler, he was a state runner-up last year, got on the podium, took 8th this year. You look at a kid like Joey Fulco, who beat Hibbler, like he had a good tournament. He made it deep into the wrestlebacks for Ramapo. Luke Galetta got on the podium again for Phillipsburg. He's a 2-time state medalist for the state liners. So, Jake Zaltzman from St. John Vianney is another one who, he got on the podium, had a great year. He was ranked for a lot of the season for us. Nick Schwartz from Del Barton, obviously another young stud for the Green Wave. So, I think especially given the depth at this weight and how much it, opened up as the season went on, for Mele to break through like that, I think is really impressive. And, given that, Amato was at 50 to start the year, bumped down to 44, and everybody sort of assumed, hey, this is going to be Amato's weight to lose. And then Mele comes along and says, not so fast, like he's Lee Corso on College Game Day. And, so I think that to me was one of, if it wasn't the best wrestling of the finals or the semifinals, or if it wasn't the most dominant showing, I think it was certainly probably one of the best stories of the 3 days at Boardwalk Hall.
At 150, the Jayden James show was on display again for everyone in Atlantic City to see, and he pinned and teched his way to his first state title. Jayden went unbeaten this season. He won a Powerade title convincingly. He only had one match the entire year not go the full 6 minutes. He won every big out of state match. He earned his 100th career win during the regular season, and he showed just how far and above he was from everyone in this weight class. And the fact that only one of the matches goes the whole way, the whole season with the schedule that he wrestled is just simply incredible. Bill, what'd you make of Jayden's performance here in this weight class as a whole?
Yeah, just watching him the last 2 years, I think we all kind of thought he was going to win state titles then and potentially be a 4-timer or a 3-timer. And as you mentioned, he got upset as a freshman. Last year lost to Ricciardi, who's obviously put himself among the all-time greats. Did not seem like he was going to be denied this year, and was not. He was arguably, and this is kind of crazy to say in a weight class in a state that has Anthony Knox, but he was arguably the most dominant wrestler in the state this season. As you mentioned, every win this year was by technical fall or pin outside of, the one major decision in the Powerade final. And, that was not against a soft schedule. He was completely dominant and went through a ton of tough kids along the way and put together, maybe the best season of anybody. He did not wrestle in the Beast, but did get to wrestle Powerade and was just, a couple notches above everybody else in that weight class. Ends up getting a pin in the state final to finally get that monkey off his back. He pins DeMar Dixon from Delsey. That was a nice run for Dixon, who was a 4-time state placer. He ended up becoming Delsey's all-time winningest wrestler through that tournament, passing Brian Dubzanski, who was a 2-time state champion, and also became the second 4-time place winner in Delsey history, which is a long and storied history, joining Jared Shoppy. So he left his mark. Dixon did. The rest of that weight class, Jackson Weller from Delran finished third. He's only a sophomore. Really jumped levels this year. And as I mentioned, I think one on the previous podcast, depending on what weight classes he ends up in the next few years, could definitely be a future state champ. Michael Kraft from Camden Catholic finished fourth. So strong performance from South Jersey there. But, the guy at the top, Jayden James, just put on a show for everybody.
Joe, I want to let you talk about 157 here, as Wyatt Stout was sensational, even with food poisoning from a bad pie of pizza less than 24 hours before the state final. He beat Cage Jones from Camden Catholic in another thriller between those two in the semifinals. He made, it was a great bout in that Robin Left tournament to start the year between those two. And then he beat him again in a very similar, just back and forth decision there in AC. Then in the final, he rode out Gavin Hawk in UTB, which seems almost impossible when you get the chance to watch Gavin Hawk up close. The kid's built like a linebacker in the NFL. Got some unfortunate news just before the tournament, and that Joey Canova from Bergen Catholic was out due to a knee injury that he got surgery on, I believe, early this week. I had the chance to say hi to him in AC, and his spirits were high, even though he couldn't wrestle. Nate Braun actually wore his singlet in the final against Knox. But, Joe, what'd you make of this run from Stout and kind of just this weight class as a whole? It turned into a great weight class.
Well, it certainly did, Ryan. And I think the bottom half of the bracket where Wyatt Stout was really hard. More than once, Wyatt Stout said, to the guys interviewing him that he goes, you either do it or you lose. And I think that was his mentality throughout the tournament. Dan Roy, his coach, said once they got to the Final Four, Dan thought Wyatt was the best kid in the bracket, and it most certainly turned out that way. You guys have heard me say plenty of times, the best wrestler doesn't always win the state title. The wrestler who has the best 3 days in Atlantic City is the guy who wins the state title. Wyatt Stout had the best and the most adaptive, in my opinion, 3 days of pretty much any wrestler in the entire tournament. So in the quarters, he gets by Vianney's Ryan Gavrish. He had beaten Gavrish 1-0 and 4-3 in regular season meetings. And then, he really opens up this time against Gavrish and wins 4-2. So, and then we go into the bout, against Cage Jones, who I think Bill told me he's 6'2". He's got legs for days. And if you want to be brave enough to go into those legs, he's going to be like an octopus or a boa constrictor, and he's going to tie you up with those legs. And Ryan, and in that match, Wyatt Stout tested those legs in the first couple of periods and then decided not to go there. But what I thought was the most amazing thing in that bout was he was able to go up top with Jones. Now, he's tall, but not as tall as Jones. So the first throw is a textbook hip toss. And then with 15 seconds left, he goes back up top, puts in an under and overhook combination, and throws him to his back and breaks the bout open. And before that overhook, he cut Jones loose to tie the score 8-8. That takes some courage. And then in the final, we could, I mean, you want to talk about a bout that had UTB written all over it from the first whistle. This was one, and they went into it. Now, Wyatt Stout has to ride out Hawk. which he wasn't able to do. But in UTB, he used 3 lifts and returns to win the bout in UTB, and he credited some practice with his older brother John, who wrestled at Penn, that made a difference in his returns to the mat, which you guys know, anytime you pick somebody up in the air, you're asking for trouble. But he handled it well, and and the one thing he said, his father always used to give him grief that, well, you didn't place as high as third. Well, he's past that again, Ryan.
At 165, what more can we say about Alessio Perentin? He won his 3rd state title on Saturday with a 12-3 major over AJ Falcone. He lost just once this season. It was out of state. In the semifinals, though, Santino Rodriguez from Don Bosco Prep took him to a 6-5 decision. He had an incredible tournament, ended up taking 3rd. Rodriguez didn't wrestle last postseason due to injury, but he should be very proud of the job he did in Atlantic City last week. Tyler Whitford from St. Joe's Met was another kid who had a strong end of the year. He took 5th. Christian Joya picked up another state medal there for Governor Livingston. Cole Stangl and Jake Clayton finished their season strong. Stangl to the podium for the first time. 2 really good kids there out of the Shore Conference. Another one, Jordan Ayash from Jackson Liberty, another one out of the Shore Conference. He makes the podium as well. But the story here is Alessio Perentin, and it's his 3rd state title. No one wanted any business with him this year, and he's going to go down as one of the best to ever wrestle at Del Barton, which is saying something. At 175, Jake, I should have rolled with what you told me during the last episode. You said that I had said that Burton was going to win handily. I don't remember saying that, but I should have just rolled with it because that's what he did. He won by 20-6 major decision over Jordan Chapman in the finals. He earned MOW honors, and this was the match that we all thought was going to be the main event, right? We thought it was going to be the best match, and the weight that probably should have gone last out of the 14, but here's Burton winning his 2nd state title and just showing off how good of a wrestler he's become since his freshman year at DePaul. And it doesn't feel too long ago that he was in the blood round there in Wayne as a freshman. So, now he's got 2 titles. He's the type of kid I could see winning a lot in college. And Jake, what do you make of that championship matchup and just the weight class as a whole? Our indie rankings, I would say we're pretty accurate with this weight as well.
Yeah, so I think the big story here, obviously, is one that Burton won and the manner in which he did it. But, for a long time, a lot of us, and not just us, a lot of people around wrestling in New Jersey and, people in the know assumed that based on his 2 results with Burke Memorial's Harvey Ludington, who Joe's going to talk about, that Cranford's Jordan Chapman was going to go 190 for the postseason. Now, Chapman told me on Friday morning that, one, for him, he was kind of just on the threshold of being eligible for 90 in that Group 3 semifinal against Burke Memorial. But 2, he was like, listen, I have a teammate that wants to go 90. He's like, I'll do them the solid and I'll go 75 for the postseason. And the thing that he told me is he's like, listen, whether I go 90 or whether I go 75, there's a number 1 kid in the country at the weight. And so I think, you could definitely get the sense of just how eager Chapman was to really face off against the best, show what he had to offer. And I give him a lot of credit for that because, it's not easy. It's not a thing that a lot of kids would do. But, this kid's not going to Rutgers by accident. I think even though, listen, Burton came out, got the first takedown 42 seconds in, and never looked back. He was up 3-0 after that. He led 9-1 after the first period, and actually Chapman reversed Burton and then rode him for the entire second period. And there's no riding time in high school, not that it would have made a huge difference and would have closed the gap all that much. But Chapman is a menace on top and is ferocious. And, he gave Burton all he could handle. After the match, Burton took probably 5, 6, 7 minutes to cool down. And he was still out of breath when he talked to us. And he said, he didn't expect to be as tired as he was. And, in the third, Chapman went for some big moves, kind of knowing that he needed to close the gap. He got caught once or twice, which allowed Burton to get back in there and score. But I was really impressed. Listen, this doesn't take anything away from what Chapman did or accomplished in the Cranford singlet. 2-time state finalist for the Cougars, took 3rd as a sophomore, was a blood rounder as a freshman, probably one of the best wrestlers, if not the best wrestler in program history, and in a tournament where I think upward of 55% of the medalists were from non-public schools. To have a kid like this in a final, I think was certainly a refreshing sight. But yeah, I mean, this weight on the whole, I mean, it was largely chalky except for, in the semis when Camden Catholic's sixth-seeded Jayden Simpson knocked off third-seeded Temulin Menbeleg from St. Benedict's. Menbeleg was a state medalist last year. That was probably one of the bigger upsets of this bracket. And then, you look even at the guys that got on the podium, you look at a guy like Brock Ozzeritz from CBA, he's come on, he's been a revelation for Billy Ashnault. He's one of the best 75 pounders in the state, certainly will be one of the top kids returning, if not the top kid next year at the weight. You look at a kid like Gentia Drizzy from Burton Catholic, who took 8th. Ethan Dalling from Kittatinny. Kittatinny hasn't had a boys state medalist in 5 or 6 years. So, I think that was exciting, to see kind of a Group 1 school get on the podium and get recognized like that. And he took 5th. He pinned St. Peter's Prep's Anthony Verdi. So, yeah, obviously a lot is going to be made of that final and just how dominant Burton was. And I mean, Burton, he teched his first round opponent in 148, his pre-quarter opponent in 147, his quarterfinal opponent in 125, his semifinal opponent in 51 seconds. So, I mean, this is a kid who, he didn't spend more than a minute and a half on the mat until the finals. So, it's hard to just overstate and overlook just how dominant he is. And, like you said, Ryan, he's going to Virginia Tech. He'll join Jimmy Mullen, another fellow St. Joe's teammate down there in Blacksburg next year. And yeah, I'll be excited to see what he does, and I'll be excited to see who emerges from this weight going forward.
At 190, Harvey Ludington won his 3rd state title. He beat Vincenzo Laval for the 2nd year in a row in the final. Ludington, if he hadn't run into Simon Ruiz in the 175-pound final 2 years ago, or if he just escaped in the 3rd period of that match where Ruiz just rode him the whole time, we could be talking about him as a 4-timer, and that's how good Ludington's been in his 4 years of high school wrestling. He's another kid who went undefeated this season, and Laval was no joke this year. He had an outstanding year. He had an outstanding career. He went third, second, and then second in his 4 trips to AC. And, Tanner Hodgins had a strong tournament again. Caleb Jackson beat Evan Matisich. And all 8 of the kids in our indie rankings, just like 175, were the 8 kids who took the podium here. Joe, what'd you think about this weight and Ludington's performance?
Well, in the story I wrote, Harvey Ludington made history in the short conference with that 3rd championship. There have been only 8 others in the history of the short conference to win 3. And let me just read this group to you. Luke Scove of Long Branch, Glenn Pritzloff, Middletown South, Mark Worthy from Central Regional. Bill talked about him earlier. Damian Hahn when he was at Lakewood. Frank Molinaro from Southern, a 3-time NCAA champion. Scott Winston from Jackson Memorial. Jimmy Lawson from Manchester Township. And, of course, Anthony Knox. I mean, that is some elite, illustrious company he joined. He's going to Iowa, so obviously he has the goods. But, there were concerns going into the state tournament because, Harvey the Robot actually showed some human tendencies. Here he had the 2 7-3 losses to Tanner Hodgins, who, folks, is going to be a contender for a state title next year at whatever weight he goes. He had the near upset against Jordan Chapman at Cranford, and but I think Harvey put everybody on notice and erased all the doubts. So to get to the final, he scores 3 tech falls in 59 seconds, a minute and 4 seconds, and a minute and 3 seconds. And then, as he said to us in the post-winning press conference, he said, "You guys know I love that outside single," but he's been working the last month or so with his heavyweight Ben Zuba on a high C. The first takedown comes on a high C and just changes the whole bout. I mean, I think we were all stunned how quickly it came and how he took the score. And as Ryan said, Vincenzo Laval is no slouch. I mean, Harvey paid him the highest compliment and said the kid is almost never never out of position. I think he's one of the best. I think he's one of the great kids. And the quick story about how he actually ended up at Burke Memorial and how fate intervenes sometimes. When he moved from Nevada to New Jersey right before the start of his freshman season, he had moved into Toms River. And one day during the summer, his father is digging holes, putting in fence posts. And the guy helping him put in the fence posts was Mike Kiley, the Burke Memorial coach. And they start talking about wrestling, and the family relocates again to Brick Township. And the rest is history, as they say, Ryan.
It's an incredible story, Joe. Bill, at 2:15, it was all Anthony Harris, and Anthony Jackson made it close in that semifinal at times, but Harris won 11-5 there, and then he teched Dante DeLuca from Don Bosco Prep in the second period in the state final. And this is the first state title for Harris, who was hurt, essentially all of last year. And then as a sophomore, he lost to Michael Dellagatta in the state final. Harris had to sit to start the year due to the transfer rules. And, obviously a part of his story was recovering from that knee injury that he suffered last year, before he had to sit. But he was dominant, all week, and he went undefeated. And then you had Sal Marchese from Delsea had a great tournament, and, so did Mount Olive's Nico Gonzalez. Those two wrestled in the third place match. And, those are two of just a couple of the kids at this weight who had a good tournament. Bill, what'd you make of this weight?
Yeah, we were all looking forward to Harrison and Jackson. As you mentioned, Anthony Jackson went through the whole season, pinned everybody he wrestled in the first period, with the exception of Jackson Wheeler from Lenape. He beat him in the regular season, beat him 18-4, and then faced him again in the region final, and then pinned him in, I believe it was 38 seconds. So we were looking forward to that match, and Harris got up on top pretty quick. Jackson did get a couple reversals in that match, but you could see he got a little frustrated because once he got on top, he couldn't turn Harris like he turned pretty much everybody else this season. Harris was just too strong. I mean, we talked about kids that are tall. He wasn't tall, but he was just so solidly built, so strong, and just he admitted against Jackson, he was a little more tentative just because he didn't want to get hit with a big move. What wasn't going to go all out and just make sure that he won the match, which he did 11-5, and then really turned it on against Dante DeLuca, who he'd beaten 10-0 a couple of years ago, and said he wanted to beat him even worse because he thought he'd gotten a lot better, which he did. So that was an impressive performance by him, and like you said, a lot of these guys will be back. DeLuca included, who's come a long way. Marquez, who had two real postseason disappointments the last 2 years. First year didn't get out of the region when he expected to get the states. Last year didn't get on the state podium when he thought he would. And this year, to finish third and beat Jackson in the consolation semifinals, which I don't know that a lot of people would predict it, really was a tremendous postseason performance by Marquez. Really, I thought maxed out his potential. And Jackson came back to get fifth with a final pin, and he's only a sophomore. So also a tremendous football player, and we're looking forward to seeing what all those guys do next year with Harris off to Oklahoma.
At heavyweight, Joe, Rocco Dellagatta retained his title with a decision win over Christian Alvarez, his former teammate. Dellagatta also went unbeaten. He hasn't lost his spot, atop, the heavyweight ranks over the last 2 years. And he's another champ going to Cornell like his buddies Knox and Perentin. DeJesus obviously going to Cornell as well. He's a 2-time state champ. And it was another dominant year for Dellagatta. I'm the least bit surprised here that he won. Alvarez beat Shu for a third time this year in the semis. He had Mateo Vinciguerra. He beat Benji Shu in the third place match. He had a great tournament. Tommy Borgia from West Morris. He found the podium for the first time. Joe, what do we see here from Dellagatta and this weight class as a whole that impressed us?
I mean, was there a bigger piece of chalk in the whole tournament than Rocco? And, the thing I like about Rocco Dellagatta is, he walks around and just bebops around the gym with his earphones in, and he's always got a smile on his face. And the thing I find hardest to believe, and I don't know if you guys are with me, can you believe this guy was a 57-pounder when he was a freshman? A 57-pounder. So, he still wrestles with the mentality of a middleweight. His biggest asset is speed. He flies around, changing sides, changing half Nelsons, moving from one thing to another. And most heavyweights don't do that, but he's the latest in the run of super athletic, super skilled heavyweights. Luis Fernandez from Voorhees and Jimmy, and of course the great Jimmy Mullen. He's going to go down as one of the best. He's 265 pounds, but he's not built like Jimmy or Fernandez. He's built more like a fire plug, which is going to, make it harder for big bodied guys, to get under him and get leverage. But, he only spent 1 year at Vianney, but, I just enjoyed watching him wrestle. I mean, I saw him throw Rumson's Matt Smith across the mat with one arm, and that just wowed the hell out of me. And, and as far as the final goes about Christian Alvarez, and I said this last week on the podcast, it was a double-edged sword for Christian Alvarez. One, he knew what Rocco was going to do. Two, he knew what Rocco was going to do and still really couldn't stop it. And, I think it was a good weight class. I don't think heavyweight is ever going to be boring again. I just think these guys have a little bit of wrestling skill and much more athleticism than, the heavyweights did when I started 47 years ago, where all they did was lean on each other and, hit a fat man roll to try and get the guy on his back. So, congratulations to Rocco, and he will likewise go down as one of the best ever.
Yeah, you mentioned how good heavyweight can be moving forward. Christian Alvarez, he's got, FBS football offers. He's a stud, and Vince Aguirre, you saw what he can do. It might be those two in the final next year, but we'll see. We have ways to go there. At 106 to close us out here, Jojo Burke and Killing Coluccio collided for the second time this year, and Burke won a much closer bout. This one, a 4-3 decision that got very tight at the end. It was a major at Escape the Rock earlier in the year, but Coluccio closed that gap. I think if Coluccio has a couple more seconds to spare, maybe he wins this, but, that doesn't matter. Burke knew what he was kind of, working with. He knew how much time was on the clock, and he sealed this win very similarly to how he beat PJ Terranova in the non-public A final, with the match on the line there. Everything came down to that, and he got it done. It was very calculated from Burke. He's a freshman who kind of wrestles like a senior, and it's awesome to know that we have 3 more years, to watch him build, his legacy even further. Coluccio, you can see how close he is to winning a title, and he came kind of just short last year, and he knocked on the door this year. So he's a lot of fun to watch. Sean Kenny, he lost to Coluccio for the second time, but he got third. He beat Brook Memorial Santino Di Matteo, who I was probably the most impressed with, in this weight class. And then the rest of the weight, 4 other kids in our indie ranks. Terranova, like I said, Luke Johnston from Howell, Southern's Cade Collins, and then Matt Mulligan from Bergen Catholic in that order. But Burke gets his first state title to cap what was an incredible freshman campaign. And, quickly here, we'll go through what we're excited about for next year and some, burning questions we have. And I think this is a good segue into, our next segment. And for me, what I'm most excited about is the fact that we get to see Burke and Sontz continue their road to winning 4 state titles. We just saw Knox do it. We're already itching for another kid to find a way to do it. And, that's Burke and Sontz. Burke's got to win 3 more and Sontz has to win 2 more. But I thought Sonny Amato would be in that discussion this year, but, Blaze Mele came in and had a heck of a tournament. And then you had, you got Burke and Sontz in the lower weights. And I mean, that's kind of how you got to do it, right? I mean, winning 4 down low is how Gray did it, Soriano, Knox, and then, essentially that's what Ashnault did, even though, Ashnault went 38 his senior year. But could Sontz and Burke end up, at the same weight next year? That's another factor. If those two match up, only one can, win a state title next year. So, but that's what has me excited for next year. I'm already itching, like I said, for another 4-timer. Jake, what has you eager for next year already?
Yeah, I think the thing is, and I sort of alluded to this before, this year marked the most ever medalists from non-public schools. But a lot of these, top flight non-publics, whether it's Peters, Bosco, Del Barton, Joe's, Vianney, obviously, whomever it might be, have a lot of seniors. So I think it'll be interesting to see, to what extent things maybe revert a little bit back to the way they were, or if, some of the backups at these schools enter the fray next year and are getting on the podium, or if we see guys, transfer into a lot of these non-publics. So listen, I think we're kind of at the point where non-publics are largely gonna, have an overwhelming presence at this tournament. But, given this senior class and given who's graduating, maybe it won't be as pronounced as it has been the last 3-4 years since COVID. Maybe new teams will enter the mix. Maybe new guys will enter the mix. Maybe, you'll start to see guys go back to their public school like you did, last year with Nutley heavyweight Brandon Taranzo, who was at Joe's, came back to Nutley and took third in the state for the Raiders last year. So, I think, obviously it's easy to say we know what's going to happen, or it's easy to predict what we think will happen with these non-publics, and there's no reason to certainly write them off yet. But I will be really interested to see, what does the next generation of Joes look like, and who's going to be the face of that? What does the next generation of St. Peter's look like, and who's going to be the face of that? So, I think that's the thing that's really sort of piquing my interest going into next year.
Joe, you have a couple short conference questions that are kind of burning, ahead of next year.
Well, let me give you a little bigger one first. And I know in our pre-meeting I didn't mention it, but it came to mind. I don't know how many people realize that next year, March 2026, the corresponding dates have the MAC men's and women's basketball tournament, the NJSIA Wrestling Championships on the same weekend. I've been attempting to get some comment from both Boardwalk Hall and the NJSIA regarding it. It's an interesting conundrum. The way I see it, the NJSIA has two choices: move it forward or move it somewhere else. And I think the four of us know there is really no place else other than the Rock in Newark that can handle the state wrestling championships, at least make it comfortable and good for the fans. And I'm not sure how it would do in Newark, to be honest. But I think the moving forward would be a good answer. Talking to Bill, we were talking the other day, guys, and they added 1 week to this season, and that was a long week. That made a big difference in the length of the season. It allowed there to be more, what I call meaningless quads and stuff. So that's one thing that's on my mind. And the other is what's going to happen to St. John Vianney next year. Just look at who this team loses. Let's start with Anthony Knox. Start with Patrick O'Keefe, Jake Salzman, Desmond Lenahan. They do have some really outstanding young wrestlers, Bubba Gavrish being one and Julian Zargo, the 6-pounder, another. But you can't help but wonder, because so many of these guys followed Anthony Knox into that program. There's a lot of, talk around the shore, wondering who will be there next year. Those of us who cover football, Ryan and Bill, know that St. John Vianney in football has tried to become a state power and play with the big boys up north. And after 1 or 2 years, they'll give up on that and the program will revert back to mediocrity. They tried to do that when they hired Bobby Acosta last year. He stepped down over the winter. We don't know the status of the football program there, but I think Southern's going to be fine in the short conference. I expect Rumson to be fine, although there's some questions that around there. And listen, CBA is still going to be, the team to beat there. But, those are my concerns going into next season, Ryan.
Bill, what's got your attention ahead of next year in South Jersey?
Yeah, last year, South Jersey didn't have an individual state champ for the first time since the 60s. And then Sammy Spaulding obviously started what we think will be a new streak by winning this year. Sammy's back, as is Cage Jones, who finished third, Michael Kraft, who finished fourth. All those guys for Camden Catholic. I really think that 157-pound weight class, if they wrestle it 10 times, I think Cage Jones wins it more than anybody else in that bracket. Didn't this time, obviously, credit to Wyatt Stout, but just completely dominant wrestler, for most of the year. And I think, again, depending on you never know who's going to be in your weight class. is going to be pushing for that state title next year. Lower Cape May's Chase Hansen is a 3-time state place winner, has only lost 4 times in his career. We'll try to take that next step next year. We mentioned Sal Marquez getting over the hump and getting 3rd. Anthony Jackson with 2 more years. Jackson Weller from Delran, 3rd place at 50 with 2 more years. Anthony DePaul from St. Augustine has 1 more year. He's a multiple-time state placer. And then that whole St. Augustine freshman class that they had, certain matches, they had up to 9 freshmen competing, a number of them who went on the states. That is a program that is, was dominant in South Jersey back when, there was a South Jersey non-public A. Has remained very, very solid, top 10, 15 in the state. And I really think they are close to taking a big, big step up. As you look at all these freshmen, coming back next year, and then, obviously into the future, could be one of the dominant teams in the state. So really excited for South Jersey next year with a lot of the individuals, as well as some of the teams. Delsey going for a 5th straight state title in Group 3. I think it's going to be another good year and probably one of the better ones that we've seen in South Jersey in a while.
So that'll do it for episode number 10 of Weighing In, your go-to New Jersey high school wrestling podcast. We thank our producer, Brian Dekind, as always, for piecing this together every week. He edits the Jersey Blitz and Weighing In, so that's a lot of listening to us. So we appreciate him for everything he does each week. We thank you for listening with us all year and following our content on NJ.com. We still have much more to recap from this season, including our postseason honors. We have our team, we have our state team of the year, coach of the year, and wrestler of the year honors to give out. And we'll be giving those out across every conference. So keep your eyes out for that on NJ.com. It was a wrestling season to remember, and we thank you for choosing us as your source of coverage. And until next year, this is Ryan Patty, Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and Jacob Ferriet saying take care and thank you for weighing in with NJ.com.